Hello and welcome to another episode of Off the Ruck, your weekly rugby breakdown with me, John Ferguson. Well, it is the start of the Quilter Nations series, which is what they call the Autumn Nations this year. I don't know why it needs to change like that every single year, but for some reason it does. And if you're just new to the channel and you've come along because you heard the really, really good guest that I've got with me this afternoon, or this evening, or wherever you're catching me from, then I will give you a quick introduction. My name is John Ferguson. I'm a rugby analyst and journalist here from Australia. I freelance write for RugbyPass. This is my channel, Off the Ruck, here on YouTube. You can catch me on Instagram and also on TikTok if that's where you like to find your content on. I am a huge rugby lover and a fan first, and then obviously all the rest of the titles come along with it as well. I'm based in Australia, and I like to bring the people from the Northern Hemisphere, which is where this tour is being situated, the viewpoint from Australia and from what the Southern Hemisphere sees of what they see in the North. And without further ado, it's time to introduce my guest here, Sam Larner from the Northern Hemisphere, the big brains. He's actually just written a book, and I believe it's come out. It's called Attacking the Space. So maybe you can tell us a little bit first, Sam. Actually, you know what, Sam? I just want to thank you for coming on so much. Thank you for coming on Off the Rock.
Oh, thank you, John. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this, and yeah, it's great to be on. It's great to talk to someone from the Southern Hemisphere. It's obviously in the north. We can get a little bit insular and just talk amongst ourselves. So it's great to chat to someone with a totally different perspective on rugby.
Yeah, and
So yeah,
I'm
so
I'm
thank you
super
for having me.
keen to like challenge that with you and see how we go because I
Mm,
think that's really important because I've been hearing some things on other podcasts that I've a few details that are a little bit incorrect or just some viewpoints that I've found really surprising about the All Blacks in Ireland, England and Wallabies, and obviously huge autumn nations to come. But I think first, Sam, I just want to say congratulations on your book, and can you give us a brief
thank
description
you.
about what that book is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called Attacking the Space. It'll be out at the end of January. Uh, the UK, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, hopefully France and the US. We're working on that at the moment, and maybe a couple of other places as well. But if you're not based in one of those first places, you can still get the audiobook and a Kindle version as well. But it is so it's basically a guide to how rugby's evolved. So I don't know if this is the same in Australia. You can tell me about this, but in the UK, we have a lot of casual fans. So we will have maybe 7, 8 million people watching Six Nations matches, and maybe 100,000 people watching the run-of-the-mill Premiership matches. Um, and so most people who watch rugby are casual fans. And even those fans who watch a lot of the sport, they're not aware of the intricacies that go on within the game. And often that's because a lot of people played rugby as kids, and then didn't play as adults, or maybe they continued to play through adulthood, but they didn't play at particularly high level, so they weren't exposed to kind of the inner workings of the game. So what Attacking the Space is trying to do is to break down why things happen in rugby. So why do teams kick? Why is it advantageous to move your wingers off the wing? Why do teams tap from penalties in the opposition 22 now? And it'll go through that. Each chapter is based on a specific game and a specific topic, and it goes through 15 of these different chapters to look at it. So I'm really excited about it. I'm really proud of it, and I can't wait for people to have a read and kind of let me know what they think as well at the start of next year.
Well, I'm very excited to get my hands on this book, and I will find it one way or another here in Australia. And thankfully, you've said that Australia is one of the release countries, so I'm very excited for that. No, and I think that just to piggyback off that and just say that it is truly a space here for casual fans in Australia. I think we're riding very much of the golden era that preceded the 2003 World Cup. Even though we had greats like George Gregan and Stephen Larkham, people that in the Northern Hemisphere, even casual fans will know because they are in the pantheon of greats of rugby players. But they, since then, we've got more and more casual being a very, very generous word, fans. But that a book like this will actually be hugely advantageous for people because Australia is a sports mad love country, and it is really important to be able to point out these nuances. And I can't wait to see how you've done it. So very excited, Sam, and thank you for sharing that with us. So watch out for all you people for Off the Rock. Don't forget to look at Sam Larner's profile. I'm sure he'll be posting about it, but keep your eye out for the book, Attacking the Space. I'll put a little picture here for you guys so you can see what the cover will look like. But on that, and before we go on and describe and rather analyze, because that is what Sam Larner does, he's done so for different rugby teams, and he's also done so for different websites where he's, as in for different publications like Planet Rugby and RugbyPass, where we have both written and more recently. And we're going to do all of that with the games leading up. But I just want to say, don't forget to hit subscribe. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit subscribe and be able to hit the emoticon, the bell icon, so you get notifications when the new videos comes out. Because I can promise you, off the back of Sam, there is going to be a lot to analyze. And I'm sure you guys are going to want to come back and watch this one once we've gotten through the games on the weekend. So, Sam, we'll get straight to the games now. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the Quilter Nations, the Autumn Nations series is upon us. The All Blacks have a Grand Slam tour coming. That is against all the home nations. That's England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And then the Wallabies have their own really, really difficult tour, as well as there are other big games happening as well. South Africa this weekend playing Japan. Perhaps not the big blockbuster game that we're going to expect, but we can definitely expect two nations with quite a little bit of recent history going at it. But what we're going to start with is the Wallabies. I'm an Australian fan. And Sam, I don't actually know. Would you say you're an England fan in the slightest?
I'm Welsh, actually. So
Exactly. That's what I
yeah,
knew that. So
I respect the England team more now than I used to be. I think they've turned. I think they're an exciting setup. Getting to know a few of the guys behind the scenes quite well. It's hard to maintain the Welsh English hatred once you get to know some people. So yeah, I respect the England team, but definitely would always want Wales to beat them, and usually we want the opposition to beat England as well.
yeah, no, I knew that, and that was a bit of a cheeky dig to see how you'd go, but I'm glad you answered it diplomatically. Future in politics, I believe. That would be the calling. But so let's have a look at this. The teams have been announced. We'll dive down into the teams in just a second. But optically, where does this game sit? Because obviously the Wallabies caused that major upset a year ago at Twickenham in the no, not even the dying minutes. I think it was 86th minute or 87th minute or something like that with Max Jorgensen's tremendous try. But so where in the psyche of the British people and the English people, where does this sit, and where does the Northern Hemisphere see this Wallaby side? Because obviously it's been a better year for us, but it definitely hasn't been as good as we'd hoped.
Yeah, so I think in broad strokes, the Northern Hemisphere would see Australia as on the rise, as a concern for any team who's going to face Australia this autumn. I think, obviously, as you mentioned, last year that loss was kind of mind blowing, I think, for a lot of the England fans who've been
Mm.
told this was the worst Australian team ever. This was kind of the beginning of a massive down period. The Lions tour was going to be basically a pointless kind of write off. Um, and that that win by Australia completely flipped, I think, what a lot of people thought. I think this time there will be less of a shock if there is a Wallabies win. I still would say on balance it would be an upset, but I think that there will certainly be less shock. I think people think there was a lot of respect that came from the Wallabies or came towards the Wallabies from the Lions tour. Where I think a lot of people were surprised at just how well they'd done and that it was significantly better than what they were being fed or what they kind of were being told it would be. So I think it's always a big match. England Australia, obviously the same month as the Ashes are going to start. It's always a massive battle. But I think that English fans now are a little bit more level-headed and not thinking, well, this is just going to be a walk in the park. And they would be a little bit less surprised if it is an upset.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear because I think that's pretty similar to what we've felt here in Australia, and I think that it is very much still Australia, little brother, England, big brother, and it is kind of that colonialist imperial kind of mindset that we have with you guys, and with sorry with the English. And I just feel that looking at kind of where this English side is at, I'm more surprised by the selections of the English side than I am with where they are, because obviously this is their first game since they played the Six Nations earlier in the year. So it's a long time between drinks. Oh no, sorry, they played they toured, didn't they? Argentina,
They did
sorry,
tour
rather.
Argentina,
Yeah,
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 yeah. So but even then, obviously they were missing some of their key players because people
yeah.
in Lions camp, etc. So this team is very, very interesting. I've got some pointers on it, but where do you think that this team is interesting from a Steve Borthwick perspective, who also now has a new attack coach in the Australian in the English setup?
Yeah, so I think on balance, Steve Borthwick has been criticised before for being pragmatic in the lead up to the 2023 World Cup, and during the World Cup, there was a lot of stick he took for his game plan being quite dull. A lot of kicking, a lot of strong defence. I mean, it got to the semi-final, and really it was a team that challenged South Africa the most in those knockout rounds in that semi-final. But I think what he is he's pragmatic, and back then he had very little time to prepare. He obviously had kind of less than a year. He had a single focus, which was to do well enough in the World Cup. Basically not embarrass England, and that the way to do that was a game plan with kicking, with chasing, with those big, tall players like Faye Stewart, like Johnny May to compete in the air. I think he continues to be pragmatic. It's just that the personnel who were in form have changed. So now he's got, I mean, the Premiership is basically exploding into high scoring, length of the field running, balling hand play. And that's meant that a lot of these players are going to come from, or are coming from teams who play exactly like that. So, Feyi-Waboso on the wing, he's coming from Exeter, who were terrible last year, then have been fantastic this year. Dingwall, Freeman, and Alex Mitchell, 9, 12, and 13 are all from the Saints, who, are not necessarily having the best of seasons, but have consistently played a very high ball in hand, high ball in play time, doing a lot of strong ball carrying and try and find those gaps in wide open play. And then guys like Guy Pepper, Ben Earl, Henry Pollock off the bench, they're the kind of people who fill that hybrid role between being backs and being forwards. So I think that Steve Borthwick has kind of just kept a steady course, which is he's a pragmatic guy. He's just got more toys to play with now than perhaps he did before the 2023 World Cup.
Yeah, because it does look like a very exciting side with some names that I'm sure a lot of people here in Australia at least aren't very familiar with, like the likes of Guy Pepper at number 6, Finn Baxter. You probably haven't seen as lot of as well as Joe Hayes. I think that those kind of players, along with Fraser Dingwall and Tommy Freeman at 13, as well as Tom Roebuck. Those are picks that us as Australians see as bizarre choices. And then, particularly when you look at the bench, you've got Tom Curry, who did so well for the Lions and really set the tone in that first Lions game when he put that hit on Tom Liner. And so and also it's a bit of an English bomb squad actually, because you've got the likes of Luke Cowan-Dickie, who's been absolutely laying blokes out in the Prem. You've got Ellis Genge and Will Stewart, who is the starting front row, who the Wallabies and from us would expect to see that starting front row. So I guess my question here is to you, because why would a Guy Pepper slot in instead of a Chandler Cunningham South? Why would a Ben Earl play 8 when you have perhaps it looks like you lack genuine mainline ball runners? I know that Ben Earl punches out incredible numbers, like Artie Savia-esque numbers, but he's not a big player by the same standards that other number eights are. And then you've got a Tommy Freeman who does play outside center, but was used on the wing for the Lions, and obviously has played 13 for the Saints as well. But what's the thinking there? And no Ollie Lawrence, who was such a wrecking ball and probably a huge shoe in to be a starter for a test for the Lions should he have not been injured. So can you just talk to a little bit about the makeup? Because it looks like it's not the strongest side that England could put out from an Australian perspective.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I think some of that is um personnel and a few guys coming back from injuries who have played a little bit, but perhaps are not quite match ready. I do think there's also so as we saw with the kind of the 7-1 split, obviously here we've got a 6-2 split,
Yeah,
although with Borthwick has talked about Pollock and Ben Earl, and I think Guy Pepper as well being able to cover the backs basically fine. When England dismantled Wales in the last game of the Six Nations, they had Ben Earl playing in the centres for the last maybe 20 minutes or so. So I don't think that'll be a problem. Um, I think what they will do though is I would expect all of those players on the bench, all 8 on the bench, to come on before the kind of hour mark, I would imagine. I think what is planned here is a little bit of a kind of a bomb squad, as you say, where I don't think there's any suggestion that Baxter and Hayes are the starting props, usually. But I think the idea here is to put them on. I mean, statistically, there will be fewer scrums at the start of the game than there are at the end of the game. So it makes sense to bring them on and then kind of just get them through to 45 minutes. Neither the huge ball carriers. And as you say, that there is a bit of a lack of real firepower in this forward pack. So part of that's due to injury. So for example, there's no George Martin from Leicester who is a big lump.
yeah,
There's no Chandler Cunningham South, although he is fit. So I think they've rather than try and fudge those guys in and kind of play around that with partly a bit of speed and partly a bit of heft. I think they've gone like we're gonna start with just speed because
yeah.
more or less everyone here is either quick or in the case of Finn Baxter, really beautiful hands. So I think they're going to have those link players. Um, and then if it's going well, then you bring on the likes of Pollock, Curry, who's pretty quick in the loose as well. I think if it's going badly, then you still bring on those guys, but you get them to do a different role. So, for example, if it's going badly, you might bring Curry on for Guy Pepper, and try and strengthen that back row with a bit more tackling nous and a bit more strength in defence. Um, and then potentially also, I think Ellis Gaines, the theory there is when he comes on, the game, I guess Borthwick will be hoping will have opened out and he will be able to bring that attacking threat. So I think we are seeing a little bit more of this where teams are willing to put better players on the bench to create matchups later on in the game, which I can't imagine would be much fun for those players. But I do think we're starting to see that. So I don't think it's that shocking from a kind of English perspective. I don't think it's that shocking. I think Tommy Freeman they want to get him in the 15, but I think that if you want out and out pace, then someone like Feyi-Waboso and Tom Roebuck are probably better options on the wing. So I think it's a bit of a kind of a job just to squeeze him into the mix, same as they did with Marcus Smith in the Six Nations, where they couldn't fit him in at 10, but they found a way to fit him in at 15.
Yeah, and no Marcus Smith here. Finn Smith has been put on the bench as the reserve fly half. Obviously, you have good cover with Tommy Freeman, Fraser Dingwall there, and I'm sure that should other things go wrong elsewhere in the back line, you've got the specific cover that that would be required to be able to cover that adequately. The weather is predicted to be 14 degree, top of 14 and fine on Saturday in London. A bit of rain either side of those days and leading up until the game, but it should be a relatively dry game. So perhaps that gamble on less scrums, better handling, probably not a terrible bet by Borthwick there, even though he announced his side on Tuesday. So if he was looking at the weather, he has very big faith in the weather gods or the weather predictors, rather, the weather men, weather women, weather readers. But I think when I look at this game, when I look at this side, and we'll discuss this a little bit more when we go to the Wallaby side in just a moment. I see the Wallabies, particularly with the team they've put out now. I see opportunity at the scrum for the Wallabies. I
Yep.
see opportunity at the back because I think the one player that I've watched in the Prem that has been an interesting kind of player has been Freddie Stewart at the back, and he's been kind of a little bit of a of an in and out with Borthwick, and hasn't always been the go-to. You've obviously got Furbank as an option. You've had to squeeze Marcus Smith in there at 15, and Freddie Stewart. You get him moving laterally, and I think players like Max Jorgensen, who has been selected, Harry Potter, who have been selected on the wings for the Wallabies. Freddie Stewart is someone, if I was playing nine, if I was playing 10 for the Wallabies, that is someone that I would be putting skittle balls to because I want him to run. And I don't want to, he's a big, tall bloke. I don't need to put him in the air anywhere because he's been doing very well. He hasn't claimed them all, but I think he's got a solid hand and a good shape on the ball for most balls. But Freddie Stewart to me seems like a bizarre choice with the conditions and the game in mind. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting character because he's certainly not the most exciting player with ball in hand, and he is a little bit of a holdover from the time of box kicking chase from England, where he was invaluable. You know, he could cover the ground quickly enough. He could get up and get a hand on it and then slap it back to, you know, whoever was chasing, Curry or Pollock or whoever it was. So. I think I would agree with you that if I was Australia, I wouldn't be trying to get sucked into a competitive kicking battle, but I would be wanting to stick it long and try and get Stewart either to kick it back and create some broken field, or to run it back and back yourself to make the most of him. But I do think that he is improving in some areas where previously, yes, that size and strength has been a disadvantage when he's trying to make those open field tackles. I'm not sure if he's slimmed down or if he's improved his agility or what it might be, but I have seen from the start or in recent matches, he does seem a little bit more mobile, maybe, for want of a better word. And so I could see him fitting in like that. It's interesting because he is a bit of an outlier in this team. You know, that back line is built for agility, for speed, for getting the ball out wide, and he is a maybe doesn't necessarily fit exactly that requirement. So I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if we see George Ford remaining at 10, but Finn Smith either be moved to 15 as a kind of Marcus Smith setup where he and Ford man the backfield, or whether we see someone like Tommy Freeman go to 15 and Finn Smith go to the centres. Because yeah, Stewart is a slightly unusual pick in how he fits with the rest of this team.
Yeah, we'll wait and see to see how he does perform. Very, very good under the high ball. But it'll be interesting to see what the Wallabies do to be able to nullify his strengths because, as you've mentioned now, which is great intel for me to know, so I'll keep my eye out for that about how his agility goes on the day. Switching over to the Wallabies side now, and they've just released it, and I'll whack it up here for everyone else to see. But front row of Angus Bell, Billy Pollard, and Taniela Tupou. Second row of Nick Frost, Jeremy Williams. Back row, Rob Valentini, Fraser McReight, Harry Wilson. And I'll go through the backs in a second. When I look at this pack, extremely good front row. That is a mobile and very, very powerful running front row. And for those who don't know, Billy Pollard was almost scooped up by the Canberra Raiders in the NRL, but chose to stick with the ACT Brumbies there in Canberra. He is very much in the mold of Dan Cole, sorry, very much in the mold of Cody Taylor, Dan Sheehan. He is a running hooker and he has had a little bit of an issue with his throwing accuracy, which is the only thing that worries me about this because we have a less experienced second row there with Nick Frost and Jeremy Williams. But that back row, I would take that back row over the English back row any day of the week, just based on the form that they've had. And I haven't seen a whole lot of Sam Underhill and Guy Pepper at test level recently. Obviously, I know what Sam Underhill's record is like, and he's one of the few blokes in the world that I would actively run away from on on a rugby field because he seems absolutely terrifying in the tackle. But the Wallabies back row is extremely strong, and I just want to make sure that we see enough out of Fraser McWright at the breakdown. I need him to be an immovable force, particularly with in mind with the kind of pack that the English have picked. There are very few players there that would necessarily blast a good shape Fraser McWright off the ball. As you mentioned, if a George Martin was there, I'd be a bit more worried about that. Or a Chandler Cunningham South, but um, we'll see how that goes. But what do you feel? Sorry, my camera's just disappeared, but I'll be back in a second. Sam, why don't you take us away? How do you feel about this Wallabies pack?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that front though probably edges the starting English front though, or maybe more than edges of English starting front though. Billy Pollard is someone I'm very excited to see how he goes. I mean, he scored 11 tries for the Brumbies last year. He's scored just a one for Australia, but he's apart from the Rugby Championship, he didn't get too many starts last time out. And he's also been over in France as well. So he was with La Rochelle 2 years ago, I think it was, yeah. So I'm excited to see how he goes. He's not someone I don't think I've ever seen him in the Northern Hemisphere, but he was obviously pretty impressive in the Rugby Championships. I agree with the back though. I think again, one thing that England need to be a bit wary of is the strength of the ball carriers there in that back though. Uh, as we've talked about, England are designed, or this team is designed to play with ball in hand. And I'm not sure that they are the strongest defensively. I mean, no team international level, especially one picked by England, will have significant weaknesses in the tackling department. But Guy Pepper is better going forward. Sam Underhill is absolutely outrageously good as a tackler, as is Ben Earl, but you probably say he's a little bit better going forward. So I think if usually I wouldn't say that possession is much of a matters much, but I think in the first half, if Australia have the majority of possession, it'll be a bruising day for England, and it'll be hard because if they spend a load of energy defending, it might be that they then just can't do what they had planned in attack, and they can't get that acceleration, they can't get that forward momentum, which is going to be key to their game plan. I mean, it's a simple game, isn't it? Really, rugby is that if the Wallabies stop England going forward, then they doesn't matter who they picked, they won't be able to do much with it. So yeah, I've been impressed by this Australian forward pack. I'm excited to see how they go.
And if you want to know more about attacking shape, make sure to check out the attacking shape, attacking space there with Sam Larner, which comes out in January. But I think the last thing that I'll say on the pack before we move over to the backs is that the combination of Nick Frost and Jeremy Williams is very much second to Maro Toje and Ollie Chessum. They lack both experience and size, although I think Nick Frost and Ollie Chessum are about the same height. And I think Nick Frost is one of the premier second rowers, I think, in isolation in the world. He truly is an athletic freak for a guy that's 204 centimeters tall. But I think as a team, you guys have the wood over you over us there, and I'm hugely surprised that we're not starting Lukan Salakaia-Loto, but we'll get that. We'll get to why that is in just a moment. But in the back line, you see there Jake Gordon, Taylor Edmed, Harry Potter, Hunter Paisami, Joseph Akuso Suaalii, Max Jorgensen, and Andrew Kellaway. Obviously, no Len Ikitown, no James O'Connor in the backline because they are not in. This is not in the Reg 9 international window, whereas the English RFU have agreements with their clubs to get them released for this game. So that is a big shame because we would have liked to have seen Len Flicky Town back doing some damage against the English like he did last year in the 86th minute. But and likewise with James O'Connor, who's been such a huge part of this Wallabies resurgence and really changing the optics on them. I think what I'd like to go to here is obviously the 9-10 combination there is experienced in terms of super caps together. Have not played a great deal, as in like less than five, I think, at test level together. So this is a bit of a worry, but I do think that Edmed can do what's needed for this side, but he just needs to make sure that he keeps his head about him because he can go a little bit headless chook sometimes, and that's not what we need. But what do you think would threaten the English side with this back line here?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you say. The 9 and 10 pairing, I think, is you know it's good to have, although they may not have the overall experience together, they do have that racing experience together, which I think will play a big part. I think the entire back three, Potter, Jorgensen, and Kellaway are very exciting. I do think that midfield. I mean, I think it's a good midfield, but I do think it misses Lang Chow, as you mentioned. Um, but I'm kind of constantly impressed by the strength and depth of Australian rugby, really, when we hear so much about how it's kind of, fading and or we maybe less so this year, but in previous years. But yet it seems like you can strip out a load of quality players, but there's just, there's another one up, and it's very impressive to see how that's worked. But I do think that they are missing a few key players who would make a big difference here. And I can see England targeting some of those potential weaknesses in the centres. Obviously, as good as Potter, Jorgensen, and Kellaway are, if England can get to them early, they won't get much ball and they won't get the ball out to them in any space. So. I think England will be wary of loose kicks because I think Australia can punish them on those. Uh, but defensively, I think whether this is true or not, I think they will back themselves to be able to control the Australian backline from kind of set play.
Yeah, I think from a Wallabies perspective, the biggest issue that we have is that Jorgensen and Potter are not the greatest tacklers by success rate. As particularly Harry Potter, he has had a fair few games where he's missed 4 or 5 tackles over quite significant matches, and that being Bledisloe's and that being other games as well. So it's not so much that he's missing tackles outright, but when the winger has stepped in, he slipped off the tackle, and the tackle's still been made. That still gets registered as a missed tackle, and of course, it would be better if he made those tackles. So he's been an absolute weapon in attack, but that's been an issue specifically for Harry Potter. And I think Max Jorgensen, he's the best one in the air there overall going forward. Not so much at 15 when he had that one game there. He didn't really, position wise, he was a little bit poor. But Andrew Kellaway is a sure hand there at the back, very experienced. Has played in the Northern Hemisphere, so he knows these grounds. He knows the boys. He knows the way that they like to play, which is a huge benefit for this youthful, relatively inexperienced backline for the Wallabies, where most of them have less than 15 caps, some of them less than 10. So it is very youthful, but I do think also that the English should target the seams between Joseph Akuso Suoli and his winger, wherever it be, and also Hunter Paisami and Suoli, because Paisami is a bigger talker than Lenny Kutau. Not difficult to be. He's said to be a very quiet man on the field. And I think also Hunter has a little bit more of an action mindset when it comes to defense, which is quite difficult with someone like Joseph Akuso Suoli in the 13 jersey, who's just feathering and trying to figure out his timing. So if he's worked on that, the backline could look very, very fierce. And I don't see Freeman or Dingwall running over those two centers in Paisami and Suoli. But if you get them drifting, or if you get them needing to be put in a holding pattern, I think they have their speed and the footwork and also the strength to be able to kick some weak shoulders. So I do think that is a worry from an Australian perspective. And if I also focus on someone like Feyi-Waboso, he is a guy that's so low to the ground when he's running that he's a real threat against this Wallaby side.
Yeah, he's an exceptional player. Yeah, as you say, he's very low, incredibly balanced, powerful. He was really building towards kind of very impressive figures last season before he got injured. Kind of, I think
Mm.
just before or just at the start of the Six Nations maybe, and was out for a while. But he's come back and he's started really strong. So yeah, he's an incredibly powerful, incredibly impressive player. And he's still very young and relatively inexperienced. So I do think he's going to be in this English side for a long while. And I would expect quite impressive things from him on Saturday, really.
Yeah, and I think everyone should keep their eyes on Feyi-Waboso because he is absolute electric. And if for those in Australia who don't know, but I'm sure those in England, you'll be holding your breath every time he takes his hand on the ball because it'll be very, very riveting. And of course, we have to mention the Wallabies bench because I think this is where the English start to get a really big hand up on the Wallabies. It's not a bad bench, but it's not the bench that I think they could have called upon had they had all their troops available. So it is obviously Alan Alatoa, a great scrummager and a great player, great workman in his own right, very hard to stop close to the line. Lukan Salakaia-Loto not in the starting lineup because he's nursing a rib cartilage injury. He's probably just getting a bit of cortisone injection just to make it through the tour at the moment until we get to our hands on Will Skelton again later in the tour. And then the man who captained the Wallabies for the first time last week, and Nick Champion de Crepney gets the spot on the bench with a 5-3 split with those backs there. Back reserves worry me because they haven't been playing poorly, but they haven't played a whole lot of rugby for the Wallabies. And obviously, again, this would be look very different had we had access to all our players, out of no fault of our own, I believe. And I think that Josh Nasser and Todd Robertson against Ellis Genge and Luke Cowan-Dickie, but that worries me. That reserve scrum. I think we're going to need to see Angus Bell go deep until the 60th, 65th minute, and I wouldn't be surprised Billy Pollard playing that kind of minutes as well. So I do think that England have a lot stronger bench, and so the Wallabies are truly going to have to play for 80 minutes here, Sam.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if Australia are not ahead by the time that England bring on their bench, I do think that might be game over.
Mm,
Because as you say, Australia's bench is a kind of, I mean, almost who's left, whereas England's bench is the could all be starters. So,
yeah.
which I think gives Australia an opportunity. I mean, there's a it's a good pre-match team talk to say, look, lads, they've started a bunch of guys that wouldn't get into a starting lineup usually. So, let's just go out and boss it for the first 40 minutes. And I think if that happens, there's a huge amount of pressure on the English bench to come and just turn the game around, which could be really difficult. So yeah, I think it is worrying from an Australian perspective, but I also think it gives them some opportunities, just the way that England have set up their team.
No, it will be interesting. It's very much to see who rides the highs and the lows, the ebb and flow best of the match. And I do think is very much the case. Just before we move on to the All Blacks and Ireland, I just wanted to kind of there's been some thing floating around in a couple of the UK punditry podcasts saying that Joe Schmidt will finish up at the end of this tour. He's actually going to coach through to the July tests next year. So I think just for the benefit of people watching out there and just knowing that the storylines of this is the Joe Schmidt swan song, this will be what's left on his resume. That's not the case. It's very much that he has tests after this 4 game series in Europe to attend to and to sculpt and continue to sculpt this Wallabies squad. So just to keep that in mind, he still has a good 8 months left on the tenure. But Sam, what do you say? We go straight to a absolute cracking matchup at in Chicago between the Irish and the All Blacks.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's time to talk about. I think this is the test that the whole world of rugby will have their eyes on. It's the rematch of the 2016 absolute upset that I think a lot of people forget, actually, honestly. I think a lot of people think about Japan beating South Africa, and the kind of those kind of upsets. But when Ireland beat the All Blacks in 2016 for the first time ever in 111 years of them competing against each other in rugby at the Soldier Field Stadium in Chicago, almost 10 years ago now, that was such a huge upset with players like Jamie Heaslett playing a huge part in that game. And right now, I tell you what, it's difficult to say who's the favorite in this one because the optics of it are so muddled here. Sam, how do you guys in the Northern Hemisphere see this contest? Because from our perspective, having just played the All Blacks and having had a whole Super Rugby tournament season against them, it's been a very, very rocky road for them by their own very, very high standards.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Ireland, there's a certain sense that they they're on the back foot. So things were looking pretty good in the Six Nations for them up until the point that they got completely dismantled by France when Dupont went off injured, and then they were just completely taken apart. So uh, and following that was a narrow victory over Italy, and then they've had a summer where they kind of beat up Portugal and then beat Georgia fairly handily. Um, I also think we're at that stage. I mean, it's been a long transition, but the transition away from the kind of the Johnny Sexton era. We still don't really know who is actually Ireland's number one fly half at the moment. Well, it's going to be Jack Crowley of Munster who starts on the weekend, but it's between him and Prendergast, who is the Leinster fly half.
Yep.
But again, that's a decision we don't really know much about. I think also when you look at the team they put out, the backs, there are question marks there with quite a few injuries. I mean, Bundyaki off the bench, which
Yeah.
I think is a pleasing sign. I think there was worries that he wouldn't be there at all. But they are missing a few players in there as well. But then you look at that forward pack, it's one of the best in the world, I would say. Um,
Mm,
but during that Six Nations, they look sluggish, and so whilst this is one of the kind of the marquee matchups in World Rugby, I'd say it's Ireland, New Zealand, it's France, South Africa, it's South Africa, New Zealand. They're kind of the maybe at the moment the biggest games you can have. Um, it is two teams that are either on the slump or maybe hit on the way back up. It'd be
yeah.
hard to know which one it is until after this game.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to describe it. We don't know where in their curvature that they are, that where they're at. We don't know whether they're on the way down or whether they're on the way up. And I think that something that kind of speaks to that is All Black. One of the All Blacks coaches now has left Tom Holland, or he's going to leave after this tour. And so not all seems to be happy in the house of Scott Razor Robinson, and that doesn't bode particularly well for a playing group having to, travel or traverse the world with a coaching unit which doesn't seem entirely cohesive, and that's going back further when they lost other coaching members at the very start, almost at the start of Scott Razor Robinson's tenure. So I think from a playing perspective, if we go back to Ireland here for a second, I like to see that Crowley's been picked. McCluskey, I've seen enough of him play to be impressed about what he can bring to the Irish jersey on Saturday. I'm presuming he's going to go head to head with someone like Geordie Barrett, because at the time of you and I recording this, the All Blacks haven't released their team yet. The only question that I have here about the forward pack in Ireland is that I haven't watched Baird play too much rugby, and obviously I've seen Tyg Burn there a lot in the number 6 jersey, and obviously there's no Joe McCarthy, which is their big enforcer, their big brute, their biggest of their second rows, along with James Ryan. Who's actually in there? That's their tallest second rower there, but obviously not quite the same profile as Joe McCarthy. And then you've got someone like Henderson and Kalen Doris, the captain, who was touted to be an absolute stoic player in the Lions jersey, but cruelled by injury. Um, Interesting to see him off the bench. Obviously, there's a return to play protocols there needing to be followed based on someone who's not played a whole bunch of rugby, but it is a stellar pack. And I do think, particularly for the All Blacks, no matter who they put out, that second row is going to be an issue for the All Blacks because they've lost the likes of Tupou Vai, no um, Patrick Tuipulotu either. They're big kind of churn and burn players. And then you've also got obviously Scott Barrett's there, the captain, but he's not quite proper as big as a lot of the other second rowers, which when you start getting set piece specifics and whatnot, it gets kind of problematic. So I do think that this forward pack is more rounded than perhaps the All Blacks one that they can put out, who are carrying a fair few injuries.
Yeah, I agree. I think the concern, exactly as you say, for Ireland is so Baird and Byrne could basically play in each other's positions, which I guess is positive in some ways, but the negative is that they do lack, neither of them are the huge ball carrying threat that does exist in the Irish team. So I think that will be potentially a concern. I mean, Ian Henderson is coming off the bench, but again, a very good player, but he's also not that kind of hole punching forward. Uh, I also think there are question marks right the way through in terms of who's the next man up. Furlong obviously at tight head, he's kind of more or less made that his own, Beelan on the bench. And you've got Doris, who I suspect will get a decent amount of time in the back row, perhaps for Baird. But there are question marks. Aki is getting on, McCloskey's getting on, Gibson Park's getting on, Furlong as well. So there's a few guys here who you think who is the next team up, and sometimes it looks like a team who's morphing into the next one. Sometimes it looks like a team who's just clinging on, hoping someone else comes through and fills that gap.
Yeah, and I think nothing proves that more than seeing a debutant in number seven, jersey number 17 in McCarthy. That seems almost like a call for desperation. Now, I haven't seen McCarthy play, but how often do you pick a debutant when playing against the All Blacks if you have a choice in the matter? So I think
Yeah.
that speaks to your kind of your analysis here, which is where when do you learn how to not let go of players, but when do you learn how to rotate? When do you need to rotate, or when do you need to kind of say, for the betterment of the team a year in the future, how many caps do we need to get into this player to be able to find out whether they're going to be able to carry the load in 2 years' time? So it is very interesting. I think Osborne a fullback, obviously no Hugo Keenan, that's very interesting. And O'Brien, I haven't seen O'Brien play enough, but that's usually where Mac Hansen sits. And so it's not the Ireland team that I would have envisioned for this game purely off a form or a fame or a celebrity standard, but you do have enough good points in this, particularly in the pack. And then you've got the likes of if Gibson Park is on song, he's almost unplayable in the way that he gets this team around the field and unlocks the capabilities of someone like a Conan or a Van der Fleer who run beautiful lines near the try line. So it'll be very interesting to see. I think from the All Blacks perspective, what you don't want to get caught into with this Ireland team is having to defend, because I think that they know their patterns so well. And when you've got James and Gibson Park who can throw those balls, that whether they're 20 meters or whether they're 2 meters, he hits them square on the chest every time. And he does so
Yeah.
with great timing. So I think the All Blacks, I wouldn't be surprised if I see a pilfer orientated kind of pack in particular. And then I think you see a backside that's really going to be able to challenge the likes of Osborne and O'Brien in the air, because you don't want to try to go through McCluskey and Ringrose, because Ringrose is such an elite defender there in 13 jersey.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing that the All Blacks, I suspect, will be looking at in their analysis is that Ireland were very slow to do much with the ball during the Six Nations and during the Autumn Nations, where at times in the past, their brilliance is in making 2 yard passes quickly, just getting on a soft shoulder or getting making a tackle that should be a solid one into just an arms tackle. And as you say, that intricacy. I mean, they're the most intricate of teams, I think, in international rugby in terms of what they're doing, how they set up, what they plan to do. They're taking back, 22-meter dropouts to the middle of the park and then setting up plays off that. Stuff like that is so advanced, but during the Six Nations when they looked bad, it just looked sluggish and they weren't making the yards with the hits, which means everything else just slides away. Um,
Yep.
they can't create the chaos, they can't create the pressure. So yeah, if I was New Zealand, I might want for the first 20 minutes be willing to kind of let them come at me and just see, is this a team that's still looking sluggish? And if so, let's pick them off. Or if
Yep.
they are looking dominant, then I think you have to take more risks and, as you say, go for the pilfers and give up potential penalties and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're dealing with with so many unknowns here for both
Yeah.
sides. It is really It is a whether it's tactical or whether it's personnel orientated, even for this Ireland side. We've seen so little of this Ireland side as a unit, obviously this year, and stretching back to the Six Nations with such a prominent Irish flavor to the Lions that came to Australia. But I think that for the All Blacks, what they're going to want to do, and I think what you'd select here, you select guys like Quinton Pyle and outside centre. You need that kind of ball punching ability, who he is truly upcoming and finally dominating at test level when he is in form, and he can play wing as well. And you want to be able to release players like Will Jordan as well. And a Leicester
Yeah.
Fainga'anuku is not a bad option to bring as well when you've got your mindset around if you want to be able to go, you need to be able to go. And Leicester Fainga'anuku is one of the best wingers that can run an inside channel. He does it so well for the Crusaders. He has done it so well for the Crusaders, and he's done it so well in France as well. So it'll be very interesting to see who they pick. As you and I record this at 1 minute to 1 a.m. in Australia, they have not released the squad, so we will not tease that out any further. But please let us know what you think about the squads in the comments below when they do post the squad, and also let us know what you think about the Wallabies and England squad as well. Just wrapping this up here, Sam, because I don't want to take too much of your precious time, because we all have very busy lives, and I have a bedtime to get to at some point. Um, um, so the Wallabies here, if you can entertain me here, the Wallabies are playing Italy after England. We don't want to look too far ahead, but we do want to kind of encapsulate this as an entirety of a Northern tour. They've got Italy coming up, they've got France, followed by Ireland in that last week of November. How do you think the optics of this looks? Because Italy, very, very talented player base in the core spine of the team, extremely skillful, some of the best, like Inacio Brex. You've got Capuozzo there as well. And then you've obviously got some stellar players in the pack as well as Minicello in the centers, partnering Brex there. But they're obviously not they're not anywhere near the kind of the likes of Ireland and France. And then in France, you've got a big slew of injuries to that squad where they might not be able to field their best side, which could dampen actually their own prospects of a big matchup with some of the teams that are there coming up. And then obviously Ireland we'll see after this game. So maybe let's not touch too much on Ireland because we'll be able to see more of them when they come out of this game. But Italy and France, how do you think they're faring leading into this with the minimal rugby that they have played?
Yeah, I think Italy are and kind of should be relatively confident. So they've sort of obviously got two teams in the country. They've got Zebra and Benetton. Now, Zebra are not good, although they have won twice this year, and Benetton have generally been better, but they've also just won twice out of, well, so four times out of 10 matches for the combined. But actually, a lot of Italian players now are playing elsewhere. So huge number coming
Mm,
up through the Premiership, a huge number coming up through France. And what we used to see in the past is you get a bunch of guys who played for their Italian clubs, lost a load, and then came to Italy, lost a load, and would go through seasons without, really stitching together more than a handful of wins. I think now, the likes of Ange Capuozzo, they are winning, week in, week out. And then they're coming to Italy and expecting that same thing. So I think we will see a stronger Italy than we have seen before. I think they could challenge most of the teams they play. I mean, they were a good length off South Africa when they toured there in the summer. So I think they lost the two games by something like 85-23 combined or something.
mm,
So they're a long way off South Africa. I would say that they are closer to Australia, but I would expect Australia to be favourites. But as with most teams at this stage in their development, they always have a shot of just building something and bringing something together and being exceptional for the short period of time. So they could knock anyone off in these games. I think probably South Africa's a bridge too far, but I think they could knock Australia off in these games. France, I think just their level is so high across the entire setup that you don't need that. Yes, there are huge numbers of injuries that would kind of kill a lot of teams with smaller player bases. But with no Dupont, Luku is probably the second or third best scrum half in Europe. So they're not missing a huge amount there. But yeah, they've got injuries in the packs, but they just seem to have this kind of next man up. Everyone's always there. So I would expect them to, well, they might sweep their games. I think they're playing South Africa, Fiji, you guys, and Japan, is it maybe? Or maybe it's just the three games, actually, isn't it? So
Hmm.
I could see them beating all three. I think the match against South Africa will be an all-timer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if Australia can beat them, that would be absolutely exceptional.
Yeah, I mean, we can only hope because as you're right, it is such a deep team with such an amazing domestic competition with most players almost exclusively playing in the competition. And you're right, it is a grueling competition and they know how to play in these weather conditions. But in saying that, the Wallabies have been almost exclusively playing a wet weather style of rugby. So I
Yeah.
think that that's something that Joe Schmidt has actually thought about that give or take, we probably play 60% or 65% rainy or like dewy wet ball rugby games, and so therefore we're going to play this kind of rugby, and if we can teach everyone to play this kind of rugby, then we'll be in with a better shot when we do eventually play in the wet conditions, regardless whether it's at home in the winter and then in the autumn when we go up north. So smart thinking from old mate Joe Schmidt there. I just think from the French perspective, you've got guys like Giard who really came of age in this in the tour into New Zealand recently, and he's just been such a huge second row revelation because obviously they're not shy of talent in there. They've got Flamond, they've got Taufifenua, and they've there's this other fault of a man that I'm forgetting in the second row, but it is just it's just one of those things that they just keep producing these massive players, and only need to watch Bordeaux play. You need to watch Stade Toulousain play. It's just amazing the kind of free flowing, aggressive, almost carefree rugby, but they do it repetitively and consistently. And so it's such a frightening prospect. And I think you're right for Italy there. You've obviously got Antoine Pozzo for Stade Toulousain. You've got Paolo Garbisi playing for Toulon. They're steering the ship. These are extremely elite club teams. So it is very and Joe Schmidt does not want to repeat what happened to Dave Rennie way back when in 2022, which effectively signed and sealed his retirement plan from the Wallabies, unfortunately. So it's going to be extremely interesting. With all that said, and I think from just a wrap up, I don't want to get from you, Sam. What would you say from an outsider's perspective looking in? What would you think would be a success for the Wallabies here out of these four games?
So I think a success would be. Let's have a think. I would say it's should be Italy, and then I think it could go one of two ways. So I think it'll definitely be one wing. I think France at the end of a long tour might be a step beyond. I mean, France only play three games. I think that could be a step too far. I think the England game and the Australia game, the England game and the Ireland game are two that should be targeted. I think if two wins, two losses, I think is a good return from this set of games. I think uh, three wins and a loss against possibly France would be absolutely brilliant. I think if you swept the ball, you think that'd be unbelievable and remarkable. I can't see that happening, but I do think two wins and two losses is probably slightly above what I would expect because if I was just to line up each game, I would say I'm not sure if we do prediction. I'm not sure how good I would be at them, but I would
Yeah.
probably say England by less than 10,
Yep.
Australia beating Italy by probably more than 10, Ireland beating Australia by about 6 or 7, and France by around 10 or 11. So I think there's a lot of those which are more or less in the coin flip. So I guess on that balance, I would say one win, three losses, but I could see either of those two games against England or Ireland just going the other way.
Yeah, no, and I'm very thankful that you went to predictions because that's where I was going to go. I was going to go next, but I do think that the Wallabies from a domestic audience perspective and how we need to attract eyeballs. Who wins is absolutely essential. That is the bar. That is the what's expected, but that's also the floor. And so I think that's from where we are optically in our sports optics. That's where we need to be. And if we get two wins, it doesn't matter how they happen, because if we lose against England and Italy and then beat France and Ireland, I'm not saying that it's going to happen like that, but just no matter where these two wins come from, that's what it's going to be. It's really going to be a great spot for the Wallabies and Australian rugby. And I think that targeting the incohesion and the lack of recent game time together in the English setup is crucial from the Wallabies perspective, because I do think a lot of people have been tossing up whether it's a negative or a positive. I would have said the opposite way around, that it would have been a negative for the Wallabies if they went in absolutely dry into this. So I think that it is a positive for the Wallabies going in with a lot of games under their belt. They know how each other play, and that cohesion is there with all the combinations, bar a couple. I think bar two or three players playing right next to each other, and then likewise for the English actually, and then I think Italy as well. But then I think Ireland, depending on how they come out of their games, is going to be really, really interesting. Like if they come out battered and bruised from this All Blacks game, then they have to manage their players. I can see the Wallabies, who really grew into the Northern Hemisphere last year, finishing, I think it was 22-20. It'll be really interesting to see. So yeah, it's going to be vastly interesting. And Sam, thank you so much for spending your time here talking with me, and for gifting me so much of your knowledge and your analysis and your and spitballing those and brainstorming those ideas with me. So thank you so much for coming on Off the Rock.
It's been absolutely my pleasure, John. Thank you so much for having me.
And for all you guys, if you enjoyed this, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button down there and the bell emoticon as well, so that you get notified when new interviews go up. If you want to hear more about what Sam does, I'm sure you can find him on X, and you can find his book that comes out in January, the attacking the space.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can find him on different punditry channels around the traps. But it has been so great to pick his brains, and it's been so good to be able to bring you guys Northern Hemisphere rugby intellect and analysis. And then hopefully a lot of the new watchers here that have been attracted through the likes of, hearing Sam's going to be on the show today, that you guys get a little bit of an Australian flavor and a little bit of a Southern Hemisphere look at you guys in the Northern Hemisphere and how we see the rugby being played out on the world stage at the moment. But until the next time that you see an Off the Rock episode, which will likely be on Sunday or slash Monday, European slash Australian time, keep your eye out on the game, enjoy the games, watch them, share them, love the games that you're going to see, regardless of the results, and support your team fiercely, and enjoy the rugby above all. And until next time, see you then.